In early 1943, the deserts of Tunisia were a proving ground for armored warfare. German tanks, including the feared Panther and Tiger models, had a reputation for superior firepower and armor. American troops facing them were often outgunned, and early battles, like Kasserine Pass, seemed to confirm the belief that German armor could dominate the battlefield. Yet, beneath the surface of these engagements, a critical factor was quietly shaping the outcome: radio communications. Every American Sherman tank was equipped with the SCR-508 FM radio system, a marvel of military technology at the time, with 25-watt transmission power and crystal-controlled frequency modulation. These radios allowed crews to communicate across miles of battlefield with clarity and reliability. Orders, targeting coordinates, and maneuver instructions could be transmitted instantly between tank commanders, infantry units, and supporting artillery. German tank crews, on the other hand, often lacked even basic radios. Only about 20% of German armored vehicles carried functioning AM radios, which were plagued by interference and static. Many Panther and Tiger crews were forced to rely on flag signals, runners, or shouted commands, methods that broke down under the chaos of battle. Units that were technologically formidable on paper often found themselves isolated and unable to coordinate, making them vulnerable despite their firepower. This hidden advantage first became evident in the deserts of North Africa. During the engagements at Kasserine Pass, American units managed to regroup and coordinate counterattacks with remarkable speed. Despite being outnumbered, Sherman crews could relay positions of German tanks, call for artillery support, and maneuver as a coordinated force, outflanking the Axis columns even in terrain that favored defensive tactics. Veteran accounts later emphasized the psychological edge that the radios provided. Tank commanders could maintain situational awareness over large distances, adapt to rapidly changing circumstances, and execute complex maneuvers with confidence. In contrast, German commanders like Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel repeatedly noted the frustrating inability of their forces to respond in real time, often discovering too late that the Americans had outmaneuvered them. The communications advantage was not flashy. There were no new guns, no thicker armor, no dramatic single-engine breakthroughs. Yet it fundamentally altered the nature of armored combat. American Shermans, though often technically inferior in direct engagements with Tigers or Panthers, could operate as integrated units, coordinating fire, moving in concert, and adapting dynamically to the battlefield. This unseen technological edge extended beyond North Africa into the campaigns in Italy and France. From the bocage of Normandy to the open plains of Germany, Sherman crews used their radios to maintain cohesion, exploit enemy weaknesses, and turn numerical and tactical disadvantage into victories. Even elite German tank units, facing technological superiority in armor and guns, could not compensate for their lack of effective battlefield networks. By 1945, the lesson was clear. The outcome of armored engagements was no longer determined solely by firepower or armor. The Sherman's advanced radio systems had transformed armored warfare, proving that communication and coordination could outweigh individual platform superiority. Modern military doctrine would later codify this principle, emphasizing networks over isolated hardware, a legacy that began quietly, hidden within the steel hulls of the American Sherman. When American Sherman units first met German Panthers and Tigers in North Africa, the initial encounters were chaotic. German crews, confident in their superior guns and armor, expected to dominate the battlefield. They fired on Shermans at long range, often scoring hits before the Americans could respond. Yet, what the Germans did not anticipate was the seamless coordination between American tanks. Sherman commanders, using their FM radios, communicated instantly across the battlefield. When one tank spotted an enemy Tiger, the crew could relay its location to nearby units in seconds. Others would adjust their positions, set up crossfires, or call in artillery strikes. This networked approach allowed Shermans to maneuver with a level of cohesion the Germans couldn't match, turning isolated firefights into coordinated attacks. For German crews, this was baffling. A single Sherman could suddenly vanish behind terrain only to appear in another position, supported by additional tanks firing from unexpected angles. The speed and clarity of American communications created a dynamic battlefield advantage, enabling flexibility and rapid response that German tank formations, relying on slower or non-existent communication methods, simply could not replicate. Even when individual Shermans were outgunned, the unit as a whole could respond effectively. Radio communication allowed crews to divide tasks, with some tanks engaging the enemy directly while others maneuvered to flank or block escape routes. What appeared to German observers as reckless maneuvers were, in fact, highly coordinated tactics facilitated entirely by superior radio systems. This early confusion set the tone for future battles. The Germans began to realize that even their most formidable tanks could be neutralized not just by firepower but by organized, well-informed coordination. Every engagement reinforced the critical advantage provided by the Shermans radios, a technology that remained largely invisible to the enemy but decisive in practice. After the landings in Normandy in June 1944, the American Sherman crews faced a new challenge: the dense bocage country of northern France. Hedgerows, narrow lanes, and small villages created deadly ambush opportunities for German panzer units. Tank commanders now had to adapt to fighting in terrain that favored defenders. Once again, the advanced SCR-508 radios proved decisive. Shermans could relay enemy positions through thick hedgerows and coordinate flanking movements without exposing themselves unnecessarily. Spotting a hidden Panther or a concealed anti-tank gun no longer required risking a single tank. Instead, crews called for support, adjusted formations, and struck as a coordinated group. German forces, many of whom still relied on basic 10-watt AM radios or visual signals, struggled to respond. Communication breakdowns meant that orders arrived too late or were misunderstood, leaving isolated units to fend for themselves. Experienced German tank commanders like Otto Karius reported frustration at seeing American tanks appear simultaneously from multiple directions, as if anticipating every German move. The Shermans radios also allowed infantry and tank units to synchronize seamlessly. Engineers could mark obstacles, artillery could target threats immediately, and reinforcements could be directed where needed, all in real time. This networked approach turned the complex bocage terrain from a German advantage into a killing ground for disorganized defenders. By leveraging communication superiority, Shermans could maintain situational awareness across miles of fragmented terrain. Even when outgunned on a 1-to-1 basis, American units operated like a single organism, with each tank aware of the positions and intentions of others. This ability to coordinate dynamically and adapt in real time neutralized the technical advantages of German armor, proving that information and communication could outweigh raw firepower. By December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the importance of the Shermans communication systems reached new heights. In the dense forests and icy roads of the Ardennes, American units faced a sudden German offensive aimed at splitting Allied forces. German panzer divisions, confident in their armor and experience, advanced rapidly, expecting to disrupt and isolate American formations. Sherman crews, however, used their SCR-508 radios to maintain cohesion despite the chaos. Tank commanders relayed sightings of German units, coordinated ambushes, and redirected reinforcements across miles of forested terrain. Even when visibility was low and terrain difficult, Sherman units could execute complex maneuvers in real time, striking vulnerable points in the German advance. German forces were repeatedly surprised. Tanks that thought they had numerical or firepower superiority suddenly found themselves surrounded, or facing coordinated counterattacks. Communication failures among German units meant that orders often arrived late or were ignored, leaving isolated Panthers and Tigers vulnerable to well-coordinated Sherman assaults. The radios also enabled Sherman crews to synchronize with supporting infantry, artillery, and air units. Artillery barrages could be called in with precision, infantry could secure key crossroads, and air support could strike on time, all while the tank crews maintained mobility and situational awareness. This integration of combined arms, made possible by advanced communications, amplified the effectiveness of even modest Sherman units. In the Ardennes, the Germans realized that their technical advantages in armor could not compensate for the Americans' ability to share information instantly and coordinate across the battlefield. The Shermans' radios turned the Ardennes from a potential disaster into a stage for disciplined, adaptive counterattacks that slowed and ultimately repelled the German offensive. As the war progressed into early 1945, the pattern became increasingly clear. German tanks were fighting alone, without effective communication. Panther and Tiger units could no longer coordinate attacks across wide fronts. Radio limitations, interference, and reliance on runners or visual signals meant that German formations often moved blindly, unable to respond to changing battlefield conditions. Sherman crews exploited this gap systematically. When a German unit attempted a breakthrough, American tank commanders could relay positions instantly to surrounding units. Reinforcements were sent before the enemy even realized the threat. Sherman tanks could surround, outflank, or cut off German forces with speed that the enemy simply could not match. Even technically superior German tanks, capable of destroying Shermans at long range, found themselves vulnerable, out of position, unsupported, and unaware of nearby American units. They were frequently ambushed or forced to withdraw under pressure. Veterans like Heinz Guderian later admitted that isolated units were far more vulnerable than their performance on paper suggested. This isolation had a cumulative effect. German forces became hesitant, avoiding engagements where the battlefield seemed uncertain. Meanwhile, Shermans moved as a cohesive, informed force, maintaining the initiative at every turn. The American advantage in communication allowed smaller units to punch above their weight, turning every encounter into a potential opportunity rather than a risk. The lesson was clear: technological superiority in a single platform means little if it cannot be networked effectively. The Shermans radios allowed Americans to achieve operational superiority, turning coordination and information into decisive weapons that Germany could not counter. By early 1945, American forces were pushing across the Rhine and into the heart of Germany. Sherman tanks, supported by infantry and artillery, advanced rapidly, often outnumbered in local engagements but never out-coordinated. The advantage of their advanced radios became even more pronounced in these wide-open and fast-moving operations. Tank commanders could direct movements over miles of territory, coordinating attacks with units they had never met in person. Artillery and air support could be called in almost instantaneously, neutralizing German defensive positions before enemy tanks could respond. Even when facing elite German crews in Panther and Tiger tanks, Shermans could exploit gaps and weaknesses in the enemy's formation. German commanders struggled to maintain cohesion. Radio limitations, coupled with fragmented command structures, meant that orders arrived too late or were misunderstood. Units that might have resisted successfully were instead isolated and neutralized piece by piece. Experienced officers like Otto Krias noted the frustration. We could shoot their tanks, yes, but we could never control the battlefield as they did. The Shermans' communications allowed American forces to execute complex maneuvers at unprecedented speed, combining direct attacks, flanking movements, and coordinated artillery strikes. The psychological impact on German crews was profound. Even technically superior tanks could not operate effectively when they were constantly outmaneuvered and outinformed. By the time American forces reached the western German cities, it was clear that the battlefield advantage lay not in armor or firepower alone, but in information and coordination. Shermans were no longer just tanks, they were nodes in a powerful, networked fighting force that German forces could not match. As American forces pressed deeper into Germany, the disparity in communication became a strategic crisis for the Wehrmacht. German tank units were increasingly disconnected from one another, unable to share reconnaissance or respond to rapidly changing battlefield conditions. Commanders relied on outdated maps, delayed messages, or runners, all while American Shermans coordinated movements in real time. In urban areas, forests, and open plains alike, isolated German tanks were easy prey. Even the formidable Tigers and Panthers could be surrounded and destroyed, because their crews had no way of knowing the positions of approaching Sherman units until it was too late. Reports from veterans like Heinz Guderian highlight the frustration of seeing American tanks maneuver as if guided by a single mind, while German formations struggled to maintain cohesion. Sherman crews, meanwhile, leveraged their networked advantage to maintain pressure at every point. Units could advance, fall back, or regroup based on up-to-the-minute intelligence. Reinforcements were directed efficiently, ambushes were anticipated, and traps were set with precision. The combination of mobility, firepower, and real-time coordination rendered German defensive efforts reactive and largely ineffective. The collapse of German coordination was not just a tactical problem, it was psychological. Crews lost confidence when they realized that no matter how strong or well-armored their tanks were, they could be cut off or ambushed by a force they could not see coming. By mid-1945, the technological superiority of the Shermans radio network had decisively tipped the scales, turning coordination into a weapon more lethal than armor or guns alone. The Shermans' advanced radios did more than coordinate tank movements, they allowed seamless integration with other branches of the Allied military. infantry units, artillery, engineers, and air support could all communicate with Sherman commanders in real time, creating a synchronized fighting force. During assaults on fortified towns and cities, tank crews relayed enemy positions to artillery units, which could bombard targets before the tanks even engaged. Infantry advancing alongside Shermans could coordinate movements to clear obstacles and secure buildings, all while avoiding friendly fire incidents thanks to constant radio updates. Close air support, guided by tank commanders, struck enemy positions with precision, magnifying the effect of each assault. German forces were repeatedly overwhelmed. Their Panther and Tiger crews, though technically superior, lacked the ability to integrate effectively with infantry or artillery due to poor communications. Even when numerical advantages existed, German units were often defeated by the Americans' superior coordination and situational awareness. This integration demonstrated a fundamental principle. Modern warfare relied not only on the capabilities of individual platforms, but on the ability to network them into a cohesive system. Shermans were the linchpin of this system, acting as both combatants and command centers on the battlefield. By leveraging communication technology to unify disparate units, the Allies multiplied their effectiveness far beyond what the Germans could counter. The radios that seemed like a minor technological detail became a decisive factor, proving that in mechanized warfare, information dominance could outweigh technical superiority in armor and firepower. By early 1945, German commanders began to recognize the full extent of the disadvantage posed by the Shermans' radio systems. Officers like Erwin Rommel and Heinz Guderian noted that even the most advanced tanks were only as effective as the communications supporting them. Without reliable, long-range, and clear radios, German forces could not coordinate attacks, defend positions, or react to fast-moving American maneuvers. Reports from the front highlighted repeated failures. German units, even when numerically superior or technically stronger, were repeatedly isolated and defeated because they could not share information in real time. Runners were too slow, visual signals were often blocked by terrain, and radios on German tanks were limited in range and prone to static. This communication gap turned the battlefield into a series of fragmented engagements, where individual bravery could not compensate for systemic disadvantage. Allied forces exploited this knowledge ruthlessly. Sherman crews maintained constant communication, enabling rapid flanking maneuvers, coordinated artillery strikes, and seamless integration with infantry and air support. The German expectation that armor superiority alone would win engagements proved disastrously wrong. By the time Allied forces crossed the Rhine and entered central Germany, the message was clear. Coordination and communication had replaced individual platform superiority as the deciding factor in armored warfare. The Germans could fight, but they could not fight as a unified, networked force. The technological edge of the Sherman radios had rewritten the rules of battle, demonstrating a principle that would influence military doctrine for decades to come. By the spring of 1945, the combination of Allied industrial strength, tactical skill, and, crucially, advanced communication systems in Sherman tanks had ensured the collapse of German armored resistance. Panther and Tiger crews, despite superior firepower and armor, were systematically neutralized not by individual battles alone, but by a force operating as a cohesive, informed network. The impact of the SCR-508 radios extended beyond immediate battlefield victories. American tank crews could coordinate across miles, integrate with infantry, artillery, and air support, and adapt dynamically to evolving conditions. German forces, lacking this capability, were forced into fragmented engagements, unable to concentrate power or respond effectively to rapidly shifting threats. Veterans like Otto Karius and historians later emphasized that the technological gap in communication had been decisive. The radios did not make the Shermans invincible, but they amplified their effectiveness, allowing units to overcome superior enemy armor through coordination, speed, and situational awareness. The lessons from these campaigns shaped the future of mechanized warfare. Commanders recognized that information networks, real-time communication, and coordinated operations could determine the outcome of battles more reliably than individual platform superiority. Modern armored doctrine, emphasizing networked units, combined arms integration, and battlefield awareness, can trace its roots directly to the hidden advantage of the Sherman tanks. Ultimately, the story of the Sherman's radios is a testament to how technological innovation, when leveraged effectively, can transform warfare. What German commanders failed to understand was that winning a battle required more than armor and firepower. It required connection, coordination, and the ability to act as a single, unified force. In the end, the Shermans' voice across the battlefield proved as lethal as their guns, securing victory and shaping the future of armored combat.